Kia ora, and welcome to the Questionably Epic Preservation Raid Guide for 11.1. In the next 45 seconds, we'll discuss how to play each of Preservation's hero trees. We'll also cover how to ramp, how to improve after every pull, how our stats look this season, and way more. We're going to be starting from square one, so if you're brand new, you're in the right place. If you're already a pro, then feel free to skip through any sections you're already familiar with. For Chronowarden, you have some choices again. These 2 points in Life Force Mender are a pretty good mix of damage and healing, but if you wanted more healing, you could move them to Exhilarating Burst. Flow State is still viable if you need it to hit specific stasis timings on a fight. Similarly, you could take the points out of Life Force Mender. You could also grab Ouroboros if a fight is very stacked and if you're good at the game. Remember, Blossom doesn't remove Echo from targets now, so it's a little bit better than it was in Season 1. On the hero tree side, they're mostly locked in again. Threads of Fate is really bad, so Instability Matrix is locked in. Temporality is very overpowered, so we'll always take that. And then you kind of have a choice between Double Time and Time Convergence, but Double Time just heals for more overall, so you'd probably only swap to Time Convergence if a fight was insanely bursty. On the class tree side, you have similar decisions again. You don't technically need to take this Leech node. You could take Enkindled instead, especially if you keep Life Force Mender. And you have a few points you can kind of pick between if you want, like you could take Longer Hover if you had a specific use for a fight, but we're not going to include them in our default build. Our Flameshaper raid build is pretty standard. We have a few choices we can make. 2 out of 2 Exhilarating Burst is probably going to be locked in. Grace Period, you're only going to use while you have your Season 1 Tierset, and then you're likely to put that point with Flow State. The 2 Flow State points are also pretty flexible depending on the timers for a fight. You could optionally move them to Ouroboros or even Cycle of Life, but I'd only recommend that as more of an advanced swap for specific stacked fights. On the class tree side, you have some options too. You could swap out the Leech and Damage nodes here for something like Enkindled or Twin Guardian or even Blast Furnace, just depending on what you need for a specific fight. Our hero tree is very locked in. You must have Expanded Lungs, since it's a 30% increase to both Dream Breath and Consume Flame. You must have Life Cinders, since it's very overpowered. And you do actually have a choice here between Trailblazer and Shape of Flame. Most of the time you just default to Trailblazer, but if that makes Hover a little bit long for a certain fight, or if there are some ads that you can blind with Shape of Flame, like we could on Queen and Harrek, then you might do that. But otherwise this is very locked in.
There is a decent amount of changes coming to the spec in this patch. For Preservation in general, Dreambreath now always heals yourself and 5 additional allies. This makes Dreambreath now hit a total of 6 targets and eliminates all the need to miss your allies with Dreambreath on purpose on certain fights and scenarios, an absolutely amazing change. Dreambreath and Reversion now dynamically scale with your mastery, instead of snapshotting on application. This change is very good and eliminates the need for some annoying weak auras. Emerald Blossoms can no longer consume echoes. This is a massive change that opens our talent tree to almost any possibility, and potentially the acceptance of hybrid builds. Overall, just a very healthy change for the spec. For Flameshaper changes, we got a new talent called Fulminous Roar. Fire Breath and Dream Breath deal their damage and healing in 20% less time. This cuts some duration from our Dream Breath to heal faster, and also makes our Consume Flames even bigger. Traveling Flame has been replaced with Flame Siphon. Engulf no longer extends the duration nor spreads Dream Breath and Fire Breath. Instead, Engulf now reduces the cooldown of Dream Breath and Fire Breath by 6 seconds when casted. This makes for much higher Dream Breath uptime when cast, along with Fire Breath. Engulf cast from Stasis also proc this talent as well. Conduit of Flame now increases our crit chance by 50% on targets above 50% HP. This is essentially free 50% critical chance. Expanded Lungs was buffed to 30% more healing and damage from our Dream Breath and Fire Breath, along with being put on a choice node with Enkindle. It's a nice buff to Dream Breath, but completely kills Enkindle, as you will never talent out of Expanded Lungs. Engulf now has a 25 second CD, and its cooldown is decreased further by Haste. This speeds up our Flameshaper gameplay and makes haste, to a certain extent, a much better stat for us to line up additional cast of Engulf. Consume Flame does the same amount of healing, but consumes less of our Dream Breath Hot, to make up for losing Trouble in Flame extending the duration. Fan the Flames has been removed. Not really a loss as it never saw play, I didn't have enough potential. A general change for the class is that Rescue now clears movement impairing effects from you and your target. More utility is always better. And to note, Chronowarden received no changes in this patch.
Before we get into our gameplay, let's quickly talk about our new Season 2 tier set. Our 2 set makes our healing spells have a chance to apply Insurance on their targets that heals them for a moderate amount over 15 seconds. Insurance is consumed if any ally drops below 40% health to heal them. Essentially, this is just free passive healing with a very weak gimmick when allies are low. Our 4 set makes our Verdant Embrace always apply Insurance to you and your targets for 6 seconds, and Verdant Embrace cooldown is reduced by 4 seconds. This effect does echo. This is an okay tier set that puts even more power into Verdant Embrace and puts more emphasis into Lifebind. You'll want to swap out your Season 1 4 set once you get your 4 pieces of your Season 2 set.
If you played Chronowarden at all last year, then you're going to play basically the exact same way in Season 2. Your Spirit Bloom will hit for a little less, but you'll make up for it with Insurance healing, via your new Tierset. The objective of Echo builds is to get as many Echo buffs out as possible. Echo duplicates our next cast, and we can spend them on a bunch of different things based on what we need at the time. Temporal Anomaly has a 15-second cooldown, reduced by haste, and spreads 5 Echo buffs per cast, but they're at a lower strength than our regular Echoes. Echo itself costs 2 Essence or 1 Essence Burst. We'll call this process of getting Echoes out ramping, and you'll see that term used quite a bit through this guide. Throughout the fight, we'll go through these cycles of getting as many Echo buffs out as possible and then consuming them. While we're ramping, we can't cast any healing spells, but offensive spells like Living Flame and Fire Breath are fine. When damage hits, or when our Echoes are about to fall off, we'll consume them, with one of a few spells. If you run out of Essence, then you can cast Fire Breath or Living Flame on the boss, in order to generate more. A high rank Fire Breath into Living Flame will hit the boss plus 4 allies, and have a very high chance of giving you an Essence Burst. It's also a bit of healing by itself. We have 3 primary Echo choices. Option 1 is to use Verdant Embrace and then heal yourself with Spirit Bloom. This is called a Lifebind combo, and we'll revisit this in a few minutes. I'd use this against sharp bursty damage over 0 to 5 seconds long. It's the most raw healing possible, and it'll be your default choice a lot of the time. Each person with Echo will also get a 6-second Insurance Hot from your tier set, and this is not reduced by Echo Strength for Temporal Anomaly Echoes. Option 2 is to use Spirit Bloom directly. It'll burst heal the raid and add a hot for 8 seconds. You might use this if you have to move immediately after consuming your Echoes, since the Lifebind combos require you to stand still afterwards. It can also be a bit of an easier play in Heroic and below, where there isn't quite enough damage for a proper Lifebind combo. Option 3 is to use a rank 1 Dream Breath. Due to the double time hero talent, these Dream Breath hots will last a really long time. This is your answer to heavy rot damage, and it looks like there'll be a decent amount of that in Undermine. You'll actually rotate through all 3 of these on an average fight, but expect to echo Verdant Embrace most often, particularly once you get your tier set. Echo-based playstyles tend to be ramping at all times, so after you consume your Echoes, start over again. You can pretty much just cast Temporal Anomaly on cooldown too. As Chronowarden, your standard stasis is some combination of Dream Breath, Spirit Bloom, and Temporal Anomaly. The order is a little flexible, so let's talk about that quickly. You can put Temporal Anomaly before Dream Breath if you are using stasis to counter longer duration damage. This order maximizes how many Dream Breath hots you put on the raid. You can put Temporal Anomaly before Spirit Bloom if you're using stasis to counter bursty damage. This will make your Spirit Bloom hit 9 people. Ish. You can put Temporal Anomaly at the end if you want to use it to jumpstart your next ramp. The most important thing of all is just to get your 3 good spells in, so if this is all too much to remember, focus on that first. The order is an added extra. If you have a very particular timing for a Lifebind ramp that you want a full 20-person ramp for, then you can store Temporal Anomaly, Echo, and then another temporal anomaly, then release it right away. You'll immediately get Echo on your entire raid. Consume them with Verdant Embrace, and then cast Emerald Communion. This is one of the most powerful healing cooldowns in the entire game.
Let's talk about my personal favorite hero tree, Flameshaper. Flameshaper got many changes as we stated at the start of this video. Between the quality of life changes and the swap over of our tier set, Flameshaper has a few more choices on what we can echo and what the tree offers. Flameshaper still plays around his hero tree capstone, Consume Flame, to drop massive bursts of healing on the raid, and unlike Chronowarden, a lot of our healing will hit all 20 to 30 raid members. The core echo playstyle remains, and we'll talk through our options for consuming them. Our priority is to line our Consume Flames up with the most dangerous moments of every fight, and then we'll use our echoes to either make those moments even burstier, or to provide some healing between them. Before we get into how to play Flameshaper, we need to talk about Consume Flame and how it works. Flameshaper relies heavily on a spell called Engulf with its interaction Consume Flame. How it works is casting Engulf on a target with Dream Breath, it explodes that Dream Breath for 300% of what it would do in 2 seconds. This is on each person, but its healing is reduced past 5 targets. What makes this particularly special is that we can stack Dream Breath healing increases to also increase the size of our Consume Flame. We have 30% from Expanded Lungs, 30% from Renewing Breath, 40% from Call of Ysera, 40% from our Season 1 tier set until we replace it, and 20% from our new talent, Fulminous Roar. All of these effects make our Dream Breath do 4 times more healing, and Consume Flame directly scales off the healing that our Dream Breath is doing. Most of these are passive bonuses, so you don't have to worry about playing around them. It is sufficient just to have the correct talents. Call of Ysera, on the other hand, does require we press Verdant Embrace in the 20-second period before we Dream Breath, which is an easy requirement with how we'll play this tier. So, we will line our Dream Breath cast up with large damage events and follow it up by casting Engulf on a target with Dream Breath, usually ourself, as the damage hits for a large raid-wide heal. Consume Flame does have a 25-yard radius, so try to stand somewhat centrally so you can hit everyone. Now that Consume Flame has been covered, we can move on to what we're echoing to complement it. In Season 1, we mostly consumed echo buffs with Reversion. In Season 2, Reversion, Verdant Embrace, and Dream Breath are all valid choices. Here are a few scenarios where you'd use each. Option 1 will be Verdant Embrace. Treat this as your default option when you get the new tier set. We'll be echoing Verdant Embrace for 2 reasons. 1, it puts the insurance buff on everyone at full strength. This is a lot of free healing. 2, Verdant Embrace also puts a Lifeline buff on everyone we echo. This means when we follow up the cast with Engulf, it'll also be fed into Lifeline and heal everyone hit. This is an absurd amount of burst when combined with Consume Flame. Our second option to echo is Reversion. Reversion always deserves a mention due to Golden Hour. It can do a surprising amount of healing up front, even when the hot sucks. For now, think of it as your tank healing option. Lastly, Dream Breath. Slightly less healing than Verdant Embrace, but it's an echo option that heals over 11 to 12 seconds instead of Verdant Embrace, which is just over 5. Between your charges of Consume Flame and ramps, your gameplay looks fairly standard. Use Spirit Bloom to help top those who are taking damage after your burst. Use Fire Breath at max rank to trigger Leaping Flames and farm for Essence Burst for your next ramp. And don't forget about Reversion either. With Golden Hour, this is still a very strong spot heal and tank healing tool. All that being said, with Haste reducing cooldown on Engulf, we have much less downtime than before. Lastly, as Flameshaper, we have one basic stasis combo, Dream Breath into double Engulf. This is extremely strong as it allows us to do a large burst of healing while building our stasis. This is another large burst when we release it. In 11.1, we'll also know that we'll always have Dream Breath on ourselves. So if we self-engulf, we'll never miss our Consume Flame proc, and we won't have to mess around with Dream Breathing into the void like sometimes we had to do in Season 1.
Use Flameshaper as your default tree, but expect both to see play. It really just depends on what type of healing the bosses require. Chronowarden is really good at healing smaller raid sizes or damage patterns where only a few targets are taking a lot of damage. In Season 1, Brood Twister was a good example of this, and we already know we have one boss that splits the raid in 2. Chronowarden also does very good DPS, so it has a niche there too. We'll discuss fight by fight recommendations once the season gets going. If you don't raid Mythic, then you'll definitely just be able to play whichever you prefer on every boss too.
So we've covered how to ramp and how to use our hero trees, but there are a few other abilities that are very important too that deserve mention. Starting out with our throughput CDs, Rewind is one of the most powerful healing cooldowns. We'll want to make sure it is assigned to a mechanic every 3 minutes or so. Dreamflight is another big healing cooldown, but it's a bit more difficult to use. It has a wind up and a big animation, which means ideally we want to use it when there's nothing on the ground or in front of us, but that's not always in our control. We also want our raid to be at least semi-stacked. When we publish our raid videos, we'll go through some great opportunities on each boss. Next is our defensives. As a Preservation Evoker, we have 4 key defensive abilities. Obsidian Scales reduces all damage we take while active. We will primarily use this against burst damage. Renewing Blaze, this heals us for 100% of the damage we take while it's active over 8 seconds. The healing this does notably transfers to Lifebind, so on some fights we'll pair them. It's also very good to counter any dangerous periods of damage. Rescue has 2 components to it now, both a defensive and Twin Guardians, allowing us to shield an ally and ourselves for 30% of our HP, along with Rescue now freeing ourselves and allies from all movement impairment abilities. This includes Roots. Lastly, Zephyr. Zephyr is a DR that applies to AoE abilities and it hits 5 people. It's a little situational in raid, but almost every boss has something valuable that this applies to. And finally, our utility spells. Spatial Paradox lets us and another healer cast while moving for 10 seconds and increases our range to 60 yards. We unfortunately still can't use Empower spells while moving, but the active range increase can still be very nice for us. We'll tend to use this on our Disc Priest or Mistweaver whenever they need it, which means any benefit we get is kind of an added extra. Our other option is Time Spiral, which allows our entire raid to get their movement ability back. This was a very powerful talent on a fight like Queen Ansarek in Nerebar Palace, and it always finds a way to be useful in the raid.
It is always important to keep improving every time. WoW Analyzer is an easy and effective way to gauge some of your play on the fly. Simply go to wowanalyzer.com and import your logs. From there, we can select ourselves and see some key metrics about our gameplay. Some things that you want to look for are you casting your core spells, such as Dreambreath and Spiritbloom, enough or efficiently? Are you overcapping on Essence? Are you losing out on multiple casts of your major CDs such as Emerald Communion, Rewind, or Dreamflight? Is your Dreamflight actually hitting people? If you tab over to the Statistics tab, you can scroll down and see all of your abilities and casts. Things such as defensives, externals, and cooldowns are all easy ways to start making more of an impact on you and your raid.
Our raid stats changed a little bit this season. The changes to Flameshaper make Haste a good stat for the first time in raid, since it also reduces the cooldown of Engulf now. We're going to aim to have about 20% of it on our gear, which unlocks 2 benefits. It lines the cooldown of Engulf up with Stasis, such that we get 2 Engulf casts outside of Stasis instead of 1. You actually need a little bit less than 20% to do this. The second benefit is it gives us 2 ticks of the Insurance buff in our life bind instead of 1. That requires exactly 20% haste. Haste also increases the healing Dream Breath and thus Consume Flame does, so even outside of these breakpoints, it's pretty good. This kind of cooldown reduction is very awkward on a healing spec, because sometimes you'll not need it for a fight. Like if a boss has 1 minute 40 timers, then you won't need anywhere near 20% haste for clean stasis casts. Unfortunately, expect to fiddle with your haste in between bosses, depending on what timers you require. We'll have some updated advice for this as well, once we can test the bosses on live. Yeah, this is going to be pretty awkward. Outside of this haste fuckery, you'll want to get as much mastery as you can, since it's by far our best raid stat, since it has the highest multiplier on it. You just get way more healing per point. Any leftover stats you get can be committed to crit, but keep in mind that you get basically 20% for free just by playing Flameshaper. To pick out your best set, you can also use QE Live. You'll download the Simulation Craft add-on, type /simc in game to get a list of all the gear you own. You'll drop that in QE Live, click any pieces you're interested in, and then click Go. It'll tell you what to wear, what to gem and enchant, and so on. It'll even deal with that pesky 20% breakpoint for you. For up-to-date trinket advice, visit questionablyEpic.com/live. It'll have a full trinket chart so that you can compare your options at different item levels. but you'll want to watch out for some of the following. Eye of Kazan is an insane stacking int trinket that's particularly good in raid. Stacks fall off after 10 to 20 seconds out of combat, so it won't be that good in a lot of Mythic Plus dungeons. Mr. Pick Me Up is an absurdly good flat healing trinket. You can expect it to do about 3 or 4% of your healing. Finally, House of Cards is a 1 minute 30 on use trinket that you can combine with your stasis release to make your burst window even larger. The break-even point for taking off Circlet for a 678 Myth Track ring is about 20,000 mastery. In raid you'll hit this most of the time, so you'll probably use Circlet for most if not all of the tier. It's kind of side grady with a 678 double socketed ring, so if you eventually get one of those, it's up to you. In Mythic Plus, you're in a more difficult situation, since you won't have as much mastery as you do in raid, and the stamina value of a higher item level ring is more valuable. I'd advise using QE Live for this, but expect to replace it with a Myth Track ring later in the season.
If you have any questions, feel free to ask in the comments or join the Wyrmrest Temple Discord server, which is linked in the description of the video. Thanks for watching and have a great day!